Boop, boop. Hi. Oh, it's working. Martin and Kata, just checking that you can hear me. Excellent, thank you. Can we quickly check that we can hear you?
Sure. Hello.
Hi, Kata.
Hi. Good
Hi
to see
there.
you.
Okay, excellent.
Yes, hi there. Do you hear me as well? All good. Great to see you.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Irina Kustova. I'm research fellow at Center for European Policy Studies, and today I'm glad to welcome all of you to this event. Is the European Green Deal gender sensitive, and how to leave no one behind? So, well, about 3 years ago, exactly these days, the European Green Deal was announced, and since then we got an impressive set of policy and legislative proposals from the European Commission, and foremost the Fit for 55 proposal, which is being negotiated and under discussion these days across EU institutions. So, and we just wanted also to draw attention to the slogan, to the motto that was one of the cornerstone of the energy transition and the movement to the net zero by 2050, which was announced by the European Green Deal, how to leave no one behind. And of course, with the policies, also those that are being now under discussion under the Fit for 55 proposal, of course, citizens will be affected directly. And the question is also to discuss how these policies, how these legislative proposals, what outcomes can be mitigated and maybe alleviated some unexpected externalities, negative externalities, how to mitigate any kind of inequalities across gender social groups that can arise, and also to highlight the success and the progress that is being made by the European Union and by EU institutions, by the Commission, on the way to ensure that no one is left behind. And of course, well, I cannot avoid but mentioning that this discussion is happening when there are several crises are being happening in Europe. So starting from high electricity and gas bills and ending up with like very skyrocketing inflation. So this discussion is even more timely during these times. And I'm also glad to mention that this event is held as also an opportunity to discuss the recently published report requested by the FEM Committee of the European Parliament, the gender impacts of the Fit for 55 package. And at SEPS, we were happy to team up to deliver this report together with Professor Joy Clancy. She is with us today, and she will share some ideas with us. And we are happy to welcome the great panel of experts, so they will come up to the stage a bit later. And of course, I'm glad to introduce and to welcome Anna Gumbau, energy and climate journalist. And when we decided to organize this event, well, I immediately thought that Anna would be a perfect person to moderate and to lead this debate. So I leave you in good hands, and I wish you very fruitful discussion. So Anna, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rina. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thanks to all of you who are joining us here, either in person here at the SEPS premises or online. I very genuinely couldn't hide my excitement when I was invited to moderate this discussion, because this really touches at the core of two topics that are deeply important to me, gender, and then on the one hand, climate and energy policies. So it's great to be part of this important discussion, and a discussion that we haven't really had so much, I believe, in all the policy discussions we've been seeing under Fit for 55 package. The gender dimension was very scarcely touched upon, I believe. So I think it's really important to be having this conversation, and I think it's become clear also as a result of the ongoing energy price crisis that there is no such thing as a gender-blind policy, and this is something that we're going to be discussing afterwards. So what can we expect from today's event? So as Irina mentioned, this event is meant also to present a study that, that the European Parliament's FEM committee requested as in order to assess the gender impacts of the Fit for 55 package. So we're going to have an introduction towards this study. I believe that you can pick a physical copy of the study here if you are joining us in person. It's also available online, so you can also check that. So we're going to have Professor Joy Clancy with us presenting the main outcomes of this study, followed by some keynote remarks from Eva Gerards. She's the Deputy Head of Cabinet of European Commissioner for Equality, Helena Dalli. And then we will be embarking into a panel discussion with some great experts in which we'll be discussing this topic and the outcome of this study through different perspectives. We should be able to have ample time for Q&A, so make sure to, don't hesitate to note down any questions that may arise. We'll try to respond as many of them as possible. So I'll leave it to the experts to do the talking. And first of all, in order to set us into this discussion and to present also the outcomes of this study, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Joy Clancy, Emeritus Professor for Energy and Gender at the University of Twente. Thank you very much for being with us.
Right, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the introduction, for setting the scene for today. Now, I think that there should be some slides. I mean, you can take the academic out of the university, but you can't take right, thank you. Right, yes. Yes, I'm speechless without a set of slides. Right, so this is the overview of some of the key points that came from this study that I was asked to do by the Commission on behalf of the FEM committee. And I'm very happy to say that I was able to team up with Irina and Milan from CEPS, who are both here in the room, and Kavya Michael, who is from Chalmers University. She's a colleague of Martin Hultman, who will also join us. There is... What did I... Right. Just to say that this, of course, is our views, and it, just to make it clear that this does not necessarily represent, although I'd like to think it did, the position of either the Commission or the FEM committee. We set out to answer 3 questions. One was about the extent to which the Fit for 55 package incorporates a gender dimension. To what extent was a gender-sensitive approach used in these parts of the package, all the different policies? And are there examples at member state level of good practices in terms of incorporating gender impact measures to compensate both for the Fit for 55 package, which very much concentrates on reducing carbon use or production, sorry, as well as the current political situation that has raised energy prices dramatically. We concentrated on three member states, so if you're from another member state, don't feel aggrieved. There was a very good reason for this. We concentrated on Sweden, Austria and the Netherlands, and that's because we were able to draw on data from those 3 states because of a link with another project that I'm involved with, as with Mariella Veenstra, who is on the panel today, and Martin. which is the IEA Users TCP Gender and Energy Research Program. I'm awfully sorry about the very long title. But anyway, but I know that certainly, particularly in Spain, there's a lot of good work being done on gender and energy. So I'm very pleased that Carmen is here also to give a shout out on Spain. So what did we find? Well, I can't go through everything, but just a few highlights. The first thing is that the data is lacking. Eurostat is probably the most un-user-friendly piece of data I've ever encountered in, you can see with grey hair, I've been an academic for a long time. But anyway, one of the things I don't understand about Eurostat is why life stops at 74. And there's a very good reason for, particularly since I'm getting close to that age, is that particularly to do with mobile phone use, older people, particularly older women, do not use mobile phones. And so, you know, that's data, that's one set of data I know would be very important to have gender data on. So anyway, what else? Many of the national energy and climate plans are not, as they are supposed to do not have a gender dimension or mention anything about gender or social impacts. There's limited gender disaggregated data in energy policy formulation. Now, there is some very strange data appears saying, well, you know, when we put out this policy for consultation, 25 responses, but that's it. You don't know what these 25, who sent these 25 responses in. And that, I think, becomes very important in who is influencing policy. And I think the little bit of data that I have been able to disaggregate or get to or dig away at shows that often women across all categories, ages, whatever other social dimensions you want to look at, have much more limited influence on policy or contributing to policy formulation. There's even less intersectional data. Intersectional data, I mean, across different social characteristics. One I've mentioned about age. So virtually, certainly in official statistics, you get lots of academic studies, which are, you know, sort of very small case study, small sample size doing this. But at an official level, And, well, the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub, which is, you know, the new thing, on the new kid on the block, no recommendation on any sort of disaggregated data. So it was quite difficult. But what we can say, the big issue, energy poverty, well, nobody is going to fall off their chair at this point when I say, right, well, more people are unfortunately going to live in energy poverty because of the price rises, and also the unavailability. Now, in Europe, that's something that we have not been so used to. In the global south, availability is a common issue to do with energy poverty. But for Europeans, this is going to be a return to the past. We know that energy poverty is not good for health, in physical and in mental terms, and it also leads to social exclusion, that people feel they cannot participate in social events. And that is very important for individuals, but also for social cohesion in society. And we know that one of the basic gender issues linking across all these issues links to women's income. And that's why it's also important to have disaggregated data, because particularly in older women, this is a big issue linked to the historical past. Right, so the key message here is then disaggregation makes better informed policy making. And what we did was, at least I would say one good thing we found was that the Climate Fund regulation has a proposal for at least some sort of differentiation. It looks not only at vulnerable households, but vulnerable microenterprises and vulnerable transport users. And what we find there's a very good study from Portugal actually on microenterprises and energy use. But we'll find that many microenterprises, shops, which employ a lot of women, so hence think about the income issue, that they have a similar situation to many private household tenants, that they have landlords who also don't want to invest in energy efficiency. But if you don't disaggregate and look at these, then you're going to miss that. Also, vulnerable transport users, that I'm going to say some more about this. So I was really excited when I saw this. This is at least a step in the right direction, but it's only one of the directives. So, right, employment. The one thing, another good news, it's not all gloom and doom. One good thing is that apparently there are more women scientists and engineers now in the EU than there were 5 years ago. So, and there's some sign that in Eastern Europe there's been a bounce back. So that I think that's a good sign. But the negative is, what are these women doing? Well, you know, this is what they like to show you, this picture. She's probably counting who wants what for cups of tea and coffee. I'm very sorry to say that women in the energy sector are still in lower paid, non-technical administrative jobs. And partly that is not only to do with women not entering the sector, it's keeping them there. And that has to do with employment policy. And so there's a report that I did with Mariella Feenstra for the FEM committee on this, on women in STEM. So I'm not going to talk so much about this because I'm sure you've all read the report. Another thing that came up with somebody I spoke to, which is about what the Green Deal's job says, that really, you know, there's going to be a big lot of employment opportunities with the energy transition in construction. And if you look at the data, and that in 2016, I'm sorry, this is the best data I could get, but I suspect it hasn't changed that much, that within the European Union, only 3% employed in construction were women. So if you want to say, okay, there's different estimates of the millions of jobs that are going to be created in construction because of the transition, then you have to do something about it to encourage more women into the sector. And I think that municipalities here can play a good role. Municipalities are already doing a lot in the transition and in encouraging more women to do in different and dealing with energy vulnerability. They can, you know, they're going to have to make energy efficiency improvements in their own buildings, in all the municipality buildings, museums, libraries, swimming pools, what have you. And so here they've got a big opportunity to say, okay, in our procurement, we are going to insist on A, B, C, D to do with more women. And we will also work with our local training colleges that prepare people for the construction industry, make sure that you have more women doing the courses. And the evidence shows us that when you do this and you insist on better employment, the men also like it. And that's a change that I notice anecdotally from men who've worked in my own house on renovation. Oh, I have to go, it's 3 o'clock, I have to go and pick up my daughter from school. Oh yeah, I really like it. It's great. I have more time for my children than my parents had for me. So men like it too. So it's a win-win situation. Women get a good job, they get good pay. Men also benefit from that. Now, I said I'd come back to the mobility, the vulnerable transport. A new concept that is coming is about vulnerable transport poverty, it's called. And what you see is that, well, first of all, I'll talk about the Fit for 55 package. When it talks about cars, it's very keen on electric vehicles. Not surprisingly, it wants to reduce CO2 emissions. Understandable. But if you do that, who drives? It's men. Who uses public transport? It's women. So if you don't also ensure that there is better public transport, then you are being discriminatory. And something else that is also changing is young people. Young people are less inclined to drive. Now, there's varying explanations as to why this happens. Good study in Barcelona, I'm looking at Carmen, that shows that they have reduced car dependency. But they are more likely to use electric vehicles. So there's some interesting intergenerational shifts going on. And if you don't collect age disaggregated data, you don't see this. So now this issue of transport poverty, there are a number of different categories of people who who do not have access to good public transport or able to switch to electric vehicles if they want their own personal transport. Older women, they tend not to drive. So if the husband, the man in the household, goes off in the car, they have to rely on public transport. Or if they're a widow, then that makes them even more vulnerable, that they do not have access to personal mobility. Rural dwellers, public transport, if it exists, is usually arranged around commuter times. So if you want to do anything else outside of that, forget it. And also, there are people who need wheels to move around. People who have possibly physical disabilities, prams, people who use, they're not my favorite things, but these electric scooters, they also are part of transport poverty. So what good practices did we find? Right, very difficult, I have to say. So if I've missed out your favorite, then please tell me. I'm just going to give a couple of examples. There are a few more in the report. The the European Institute of Gender Equality, their Gender Equality Index is a good monitoring tool. It's there on the website, so why are these NECPs not using it? Good question. Gender budgeting is a legal requirement in all ministries in Austria. So there's a lot of very interesting gender-related work going on in Austria. Now, I came back to saying, shout out for the local authorities. The Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy Europe are addressing energy poverty. And they identify vulnerable groups based on a range of social characteristics. So they are asking for gender disaggregated data. The city of Malmö in Sweden, their public transport system has been developed using a gender-sensitive and intersectional approach. They realized that when they were putting out their surveys, they were not getting women answering them. I thought, okay, perhaps if we thought, where do women go, we could go there and ask. Oh, what a surprise. They went to swimming pools, they went to hospitals, they went to some other places where you get lots of women, and they got more women answering their surveys. Right, and so they then found out what women did or didn't like about public transport, and they've made a policy based on a much broader set of views of what you want from public transport. I haven't talked about this issue of energy communities, which is one that is very topical in the Commission. But energy communities are small groups who provide energy for a certain area. It's much smaller, not a big utility. But what you tend to find in these is that they are highly dominated by white middle-class men. So not a lot of social inclusion in those, but there's more in the report on that. But and of course, they have often a subscription that you have to pay a sum of money to be a member of that community to benefit from it. And often the fees are so high that people who live in energy poverty could not afford to pay them. So what the city of Eeklo in Belgium has done is that it pays the fee for the energy vulnerable households to be a member. So that's an example. So what did we recommend? Well, quickly, some tips for the Commission to do it better. That DG Energy, and somebody said to me, well, they should all do it, but I was focusing on energy, develop a gender action plan for addressing energy poverty. The EIGE can help them with that. collect gender disaggregated intersectional data. They've already had a rap on the knuckles from the Court of European Auditors over the lack of this data. Member states, they can certainly do it a lot better. NECP should include a gender impact assessment. They've got no excuse for this. It's on the IEG website. And they could strengthen a much broader participation in developing and implementing energy poverty mitigation strategies. Make sure a much broader set of citizens get involved. And then the last thing is that to say going beyond the vulnerable, adopting concepts of what is known as the hard-to-reach energy end users. And this is not a pejorative. It's not judgmental when we're saying hard to reach, because there are good reasons for people being hard to reach to improve their energy use. Firstly, there's a group who have a different set of motivation. You have high-income households who have low interest in energy efficiency. I will make a public confession. I have taught energy management for 30 years. Where does our smart meter live? In the drawer. So if I don't use it, and I, have a good understanding of it, the ordinary household isn't going to use it. So, people like me need to be motivated. Perhaps the public shaming will now maybe use it. People who live in stressful circumstances, they have other things on their mind than worrying about the energy bill until it's too late. And then and I mentioned also not only households, but small enterprises where you find a lot of women, and they often are very high energy users, hairdressers, bakeries, cafes, but they don't have the expertise to look at their energy use. People who live in different physical locations, in rural areas in particular, I mentioned those, older people I've mentioned, literacy levels. Now, it's something that's interesting that came out of a piece of work that Mariella did, was to show that the literacy levels in the Netherlands is declining. Now, that's not something we expect today. So how much further is this over the European Union? So only relying always on written data, no matter written messages, wherever it comes from, is going to miss some people. So the other thing I would say is one of the problems of data gathering is that statisticians Milan's going to get annoyed with me because I'm going to say economists, but not all economists, assume a unified household when they collect data. It's the household data. And this is not a true reflection of what is going on in the household. And if you rely only on a numeric, then you are going to miss a lot of information that's going on. You miss people who avoid energy bills by detrimental behavior, switching the heating off, cooling off. In the Netherlands, there's about 900,000 households that the government does not know anything about their energy use. That's a lot, that's 13% nearly of all the households in the Netherlands. And inter-household tensions. Intergenerational ones, I suspect, is the big issue at the moment. Turn the computer off, stop playing the game, stop, and I need to charge my mobile phone. No, that sort of thing I'm sure is very common now. And one sign of progress, the Energy Deficiency Directive proposes a differentiated definition linked to access to energy services. So heating, cooling, lighting, a number of things. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I would particularly like to thank the experts who contributed to the study.
Thank you so much, Joy, for this comprehensive presentation, and I think you've brought a lot of insight really on the scale of the impact. So we'll be able to discuss that later on. Hopefully, if we have any questions to the about the study, we'll be able also to answer them later. Next up, I'm delighted to welcome here on stage Eva Gerards. She's Deputy Head of Cabinet of European Commissioner for Equality, Elena Dalli, for some keynote remarks. Thanks a lot, Eva, for being with us.
Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here, and it's nice to see also a lot of familiar faces. So the topic of equality and diversity linking to energy, this is a topic that has interested me always already when I worked with Megan, when Megan was my boss back in DG Energy many years ago. I want to start to explain you a little bit the background of energy policy, how we do, equality policy in the Commission. So when President von der Leyen became president of the current Commission and had for the first time a gender-balanced college of commissioners, she appointed also for the first time an equality commissioner. This portfolio didn't exist before, and it was awarded to Helena Dalli from Malta. And one of the tasks that the commissioner got was to strengthen the commitment to inclusion and equality into all policies, to mainstream equality into all policies of the Commission. And with equality and inclusion, we mean that we are all equal, irrespective of our sex, our ethnic origin, religion or belief, disability, age or sexual orientation. So it's not just gender equality that we're looking into, but equality in all of its senses. And here intersectionality is very important, because if you belong to more than one of these groups that face disadvantages or discrimination, then this is you have a much stronger experience of these disadvantages. So how do we do the mainstreaming? Commissioner Dalli doesn't have services. There's not a Director General for Equality or Inclusion. We have a service in the Secretary General, which is called the Task Force. The Task Force Secretariat is sitting centrally in the SecGen, but then we have one representative of this Equality Task Force sitting in all services. So we have a person in DG Energy, in DG Klima, in DG Agriculture, Transport, Competition, and so on. And these equality coordinators, they are in regular contact with us. They meet the commissioner regularly, and they have this awareness that equality policy should be streamlined into all sectorial policies. And I must say that after 3 years of this college, we see the results, because in the beginning we saw a lot of eye rolling when we mentioned equality in the context of agriculture policy or transport or energy. But now when we see policy proposals, there is actually an equality dimension, and often a gender equality dimension already in it. Just to mention a few of our recent equality proposals, we had 5 equality strategies since the beginning of the mandate on gender equality, on LGBTI people, on Roma. We have an anti-racism action plan, and we have a strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities. Then last year we adopted a directive on pay transparency. This is an important point that you mentioned, Joy, is the economic power of women, because in Europe we have a gender pay gap of 13%, which leads in the long run to a gender pension gap of almost 30%. That means at the end of their job lives, women have around 30% less money available than men. And of course, often leading to poverty at older age. Then we had, this year we proposed a directive fighting violence against women and domestic violence. That was also something we saw a lot in the lockdown. There were increased reports of domestic violence. Then we recently had a recommendation on Barcelona targets and on early childhood care, which invites the member states. It's a non-binding recommendation, but the member states have, I think today, they are adopting it unanimously. It invites the member states to provide more and better qualified childcare, which allows more women to enter the labor market or to increase the hours that they are working. Because of course we have a lot more women working part-time than men, and we have more women not working because of their care duties at home. And then yesterday, the Commission adopted an equality package consisting of a proposal to strengthen the independence and the resources of equality bodies in the member states, and the proposal on parenthood, giving children also of same-sex couples the possibility to move freely and have their documents recognized in every member state. Now I'm coming to the energy part of equality, or the equality dimension of energy and climate policies, what the ones you're addressing in your reports. So the Fit for 55 package is the ultimate aim of it is to accelerate the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in the next decade and allow us to reach carbon neutrality by the year 2050. And it's a package of proposals that address all different sectors of the EU's economy to be fit to meet this challenge and to reach our climate targets. For example, we have the application of the emissions trading to new sectors and tightening of the existing EU emissions trading system, with the increased use and increased targets for energy efficiency and for renewable energy. We have a faster rollout of low emission transport modes, as well as the infrastructure and the fuels to support them. We have an alignment of taxation policies with the European Green Deal objectives and measures to prevent carbon leakage. And we have tools to preserve and grow our natural carbon sinks, for example, on our forestry proposals. And you all know that the energy sector is facing tremendous challenges, and one is, of course, the climate change, but another one is the current aggression of Russia to Ukraine, and following this and following the sanctions and the limitation of deliveries of gas and oil to Europe, we saw an enormous increase in gas and oil prices. So the current price crisis has in a way exacerbated these problems that we are facing, that the energy sector was already facing. And that leads to the fact that the member states have to adopt all these Commission proposals much, much faster and to have to implement them much, much faster. And a lot of people thought that with all these crises that we're having and all these problems we're seeing at the moment, that, yeah, equality should not play such an important role because this is a luxury and this is for the good times, but now we have real problems to solve. But the Commission doesn't think so. We think equality has to be part of the solution and is a critical element of the way we are addressing these twofold crises. And I would like to name a couple of aspects where energy policy and equality go hand in hand, and where we see that equality has an impact and energy policy has an impact on equality the other way and the other way around. So factors like gender, age, and also socioeconomic exclusion are critical. When we're looking at energy poverty, we have heard that there's a higher rate of women in energy poverty than men, and we have also spoken about the causes of this. There's also a recent report from the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub, which explores 21 indicators of energy poverty, and it could be interesting to read this in this context. Then, as you also mentioned, we have the national energy and climate plans, which member states have to update now, because they have to integrate the higher and more ambitious plans for energy efficiency and renewable energy. But in these updates, they also have to explain how they will reduce or alleviate energy poverty through energy efficiency and safeguard measures, and also how they take into account the situations of the most vulnerable people. And in this context, I would like to mention that we have also put into the proposal that member states are invited to, when public buildings or social buildings are renovated in order to increase their energy efficiency, and they use money to renovate buildings, that at the same time they should also look into the possibility to increase the accessibility of the building for persons with disabilities or reduced mobility. So for example, if you insulate the walls of a building, think of also putting a ramp to enable a wheelchair to access the building. Then also another aspect of persons with disabilities, they are often amongst those that are most adversely affected in an emergency. We have seen that last year when we had these horrible floodings in Germany and Belgium in the summer, that it was much more difficult to evacuate buildings with homes, for example, with persons with disabilities. Already the alarm and warning systems didn't work, and of course it takes longer time to evacuate them, so they have higher mortality rates in crisis situations, and this also has to be part of our mitigation efforts. On the positive side, EIGE will dedicate their 2023 work program to the energy transition and social fairness, and they will soon publish a study on the gender dimension of the Fit for 55 package, and you've probably been in contact regarding your report. And finally, on the labor conditions in the energy sector, the Commission in late 2021 launched a new project to promote equality, diversity, and inclusion in the energy sector, and this is called the Equality Platform for the Energy Sector. And the idea is to have a networking and good practices platform of energy stakeholders. So this is voluntary, of course, and companies can join it. And they will exchange how to promote equality, diversity, and inclusion in their activities. So the idea is to drive social change via the workplace. So all of this to stress that the Commission is fully committed. We are very aware of the equality dimension of not only of energy, but of all our policies. And we're trying always to take into account the gender perspective and the perspective of other disadvantaged groups, that in order to close the inequality gap and to involve all of our disadvantaged groups. We think that the European Green Deal can only be successful if all disadvantaged groups are fully associated, and our responsibility is to make sure that the green transition is a just transition and leaves nobody behind. I thank you for your report. It was really interesting to read. There was a lot of things I knew, but a lot of new things and aspects that I had not known before. And I agree with you that this situation is not yet perfect and a lot has to be done. And I will bring this report back to especially to DG Energy and Climate, and to discuss how we can better improve equality considerations in our energy policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eva, for being with us. I think it's very important and really good to see the commitment of the current Commission in bringing equality across policy areas, and also to see that the report has really resonated that is going to resonate on the Commission's work. So thank you so much for having been with us today. Now, if I may invite our panelists to those of you who are online are already with us, and those of you who are on site, if you can take a seat with me here on stage. And let's get our discussions started. Maybe. That's a great question. I mean, I think maybe you can have this, Marielle and Carmen, and then maybe, yeah, then Megan here, and then I can just stay here. Yeah, that's great. All right, so we are going to be exploring the topic of gender-sensitive energy and climate policies now with a bit more detail. The way we're going to be starting the panel is that we're going to start a bit with the theoretical and even a bit like the individual framework. And then, let's say, we'll be zooming out from perhaps a bit more of a local and regional perspective, a national perspective, and to end up perhaps with a European perspective into it. Remember, you can ask questions to our panelists If you are joining us online, I believe you can put forward your questions on the YouTube chat. If you are joining in person, we'll be able to take a few questions here on the floor. So I'm delighted to welcome our speakers for this panel. So from here joining us in person, we have with us Megan Richards. She's a former Director of Energy Policy at the European Commission's Directorate General for Energy and is currently a Senior Visiting Fellow at the German Marshall Fund. Next up let's say towards your right, is Carmen Sanchez Guevara. She's an Associate Professor at the Polytechnic University of Madrid. Next up is Marielle Venstra. She's Senior Researcher for Gender Innovation and the Energy Transition at the University of Twente. And also with us is Milan Elkerbout. He's the Head of Climate Policy at the Center for European Policy Studies, so one of our hosts today, and also co-authors of the study. And joining us online is Kata Tutto. She's the Deputy Mayor of Budapest and Rapporteur at the European Committee of the Regions. Thanks a lot for joining us. And there's also with us, last but not least, Martin Holtman. He's an Associate Professor at the Chalmers University of Technology. Martin, in fact, let me start with you, because we've been discussing already, and I think it's quite evident why an intersectional and gender-sensitive approach matters when it comes to designing energy and climate policies. But I believe you've also done a lot of work when it comes to masculinity norms in the energy and climate transition. So I think it would be great to hear a bit more about that, like which role the masculinities play when it comes to the transition towards a more sustainable energy systems. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, thank you very much. I start from the results from current gender research that we need to have an intersectional approach. We cannot only rely on understanding binary sex, men and women. We need to understand different sex identities, and we also need to understand how individuals are part of also other aspects of life, like class or ethnicity or local context. So that's kind of a starting point for me. Also, another starting point coming out as a result of gender studies of lately is that we need to change the whole cultures in which we are embedded. It is not enough to just have equal representation or equal pay. We need to think about also transform the gender equal cultures to another type of equal culture. That's my starting point. And I'm also looking very much into the other side of the coin of energy poverty, because there is a huge problem of the richest in society. And we know that if we're gonna hire up those with low incomes, which will then most certainly have more emissions, we need to bring down those with high emissions, which are the rich ones. A recent article by Lucas Chantel in Nature Sustainability shows, for example, that the 10% richest in the world are emitting 50% of the carbon dioxide emissions. So we really need to bring down the huge emissions by the richest if we're gonna take the energy challenge and the climate challenge for you. So I've been looking into masculinities here because my findings both historically and today is that a way to behave as man that we call industrial breadwinner masculinities is both stopping and being anti-feminist and also leading to high emitting lifestyles. It is also similar men who has got a lot of power in the energy sector, and many of them are also dismissing climate science at all. But then we also find eco-modern masculinities, which are focusing in on this as only a technological issue, like it's only to take away emissions and leaving the gender equality issue aside. So we think we need to move away from both those type of masculinities that we see are now dominating. Yeah, that was short about my work. So thank you much for having me here.
Thank you very much, Martin, and we look forward to discussing this in more detail. Now let's perhaps take the next step and look at the role of what local and regional governments can do. And with us is Kata Tutu as Deputy Mayor of Budapest, but also a representative of the Committee of the Regions. How do you think, the study presented by Joey Clancy already outlined the potential of that municipalities and regions can have in this front, but what can you tell us about that? And if you have some examples that you can share with us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me here. So when we talk about the Green Deal, we talk about why is it gender blind? Why is it important? What we see is it's been identified, we talked about it today, that we know about existing inequalities between men and women. And we know that the main root cause of the pay gap and the pension gap is the care gap, that the paid and unpaid care work is not equally distributed. And this is one of the root causes. What we know is that with this Green Deal, we Europeans want to transform our energy usage, our cities, our societies. But without the data and without the gender impact assessment, we have like zero idea how will this affect this existing identified gender gap or gender gaps. Will it widen it or will it close it? We have the equality strategies, but the reality is that when it comes to budgeting decisions, gender equality vanishes, disappears. It's in a different box. There's a budgeting box and a gender equality box, and they don't match. What happens at the local level? The local level is important, not just because we always say we implement most of the European policies in the Green Deal when it comes to local energy investments or refurbishing of houses or local energy production or biodiversity or adaptation. But we provide a lot of public services that address this care gap or can address this care gap, because what this is all about, that if we have this public money, who we spend it on, who we provide service to. If we spend money on an investment, will it alleviate this gender care gap or not? Who will we give? And now it's on the contrary, because we usually talk about building new things. But in this current energy crisis, that to give concrete examples and maybe not positive, but to underline the importance. So when there are austerity measures, when you have to cut, because now it's not just energy poor citizens who we are identifying as cities, local municipalities, but also energy poor local municipalities, which means that a lot of cities, I see it in Hungary, a lot of local municipalities, they don't have enough budget for next year to pay all the energy bills. So what are they doing? They're cutting public services. What public services they are planning to cut? Cutting, dimming street light. Cutting street light is not an energy issue. It's a safety issue. And men and women has different safety perceptions. And we have to understand this, that cutting street light can actually close women into their homes. And it's not there on the table, this aspect. The second, what cities are planning a lot? Cutting, curbing public transport, because public transport uses a lot of energy. We've talked about this today, it was presented. The major users of public transport are women. What else? A lot of local municipalities are planning on longer winter holidays for nurseries, kindergartens, schools. We've seen that in COVID. If the school is closed and there's homeschooling, who is staying home? The majority, it is women. A lot of municipalities are planning to close for a few months cultural institutions, which are places where a lot of people go into the daytime and like warm up. When we look at all these office temperature decreases, I know it's different in every member state there, but what people are used to. But an 18 degrees office temperature means absolutely different for men and women because of different biology. It's not a gender issue, it's a biological issue. Men and women have different circulation, different metabolic rates, and affect these sort of measures differently. So why we do this? We do this because we have different roles, different realities. It's both a gender aspect, and there is also biological aspect, and this has to be at the table. And by today, although a lot of cities have gender equality plans, but they are not intertwined with budgeting and with other policies. And if I always say, if we look for a good example, it's Vienna, but it takes, like, as I see, decades to put it all into practice. So I'll cut it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kata. I think I've seen a lot of nodding from the audience, so I think a lot of us resonated with all the different challenges that you've outlined. Now, we've just tackled the local and regional perspective. Let's move to a more national one, and I would like to bring in Carmen. If we look at I mean, you're joining us from all the way from Spain, and if we look at Spain, there's been rising levels of energy poverty already in recent years, even before the ongoing energy price crisis. So I think it would be very interesting to see how Spain has implemented a gender perspective, or is implementing a gender perspective. Is it implementing it at all? Also taking the fact that the current government prides itself to be a feminist government. At least in the NECP, the National Energy and Climate Plan, there's a mention towards a gender and intersectional approach. So how is it playing out in practice?
Well, I've got no very good news, I have to say. Yes, the National Energy and Climate Policy, it considers incorporating women in the industry, but I just took a look at that, and there are no specific plans on how are they going to do that, because it's not like planting mushrooms. You need to work from the beginning. So not a specific gender-oriented policies. But what I would like to add to this discussion is that when we talk about the gender perspective, I try to shift the way I read the policies, the way I read different documents. Like, are this document aimed at helping to maintain life? It's like not only about incorporating women into industry, into different perspectives, but the way to really shift the way we develop these policies is like, are we maintaining life with this policy? And I bring it to something very, very specific. I'm an architect, I'm not a policy expert, so I work in another level, fighting every day with energy certificates, energy renovation, neighborhoods, working with neighbors. And for example, now we are looking at the energy certificates, which derives from all these policies we are drafting within Europe. And we still don't know if an A will maintain a household under thermal comfort with no energy use. And we do not have an answer for that. And now we're talking about this, it seems to be a short energy crisis, but this Ukraine invasion, it's just a point under this huge energy crisis. And what I see in all these European policies is like, we are trying to keep the model as usual, shifting the energy supply origin, but maintaining the same. And what I want to claim today is like, we won't have energy in the next years. The era of cheap energy has ended. And when we need to think, as Kata Tutoshi was saying, we cut public transport, or which are the main things we need to maintain life. And if we focus and base our policies on what is needed to maintain lives, kindergartens, schools, public transport, thermal comfort at home, we will incorporate this gender perspective in the agenda.
Thank you, Carmen. And I think it also boils down once again to the need for gender disaggregated data, right, in order to be able to assess all these impacts and all this perspective. Things a lot. Now, perhaps connecting the national and the European dimension, we've already mentioned the national energy and climate plans that EU member states had to submit to the European Commission in terms of seeing how do they implement the necessary energy policies to deliver towards a 2030 target. That was before, by the way, the EU agreed the 55% target by 2030. So now there's the aim to be reviewing these plans. And from this point of view, I would like to draw in Mariella Finstra and ask her, which potential do you see in national energy and climate plans to be addressing this gender impacts of the Fit for 55 package and energy and climate policies more broadly?
So, yeah, so yes, thank you for your question, and wonderful to hear this discussion. I think in the long time, Joy and I are working together on gender and energy. The momentum is definitely there to integrate a gender mainstreaming perspective into all energy policies at all levels. But I have to say I'm really disappointed with the NNCPs. I've studied the NNCPs in the first draft version and then the final submitted versions. And I mean, they're huge documents. Now we're talking about documents of more than 200 pages each. And for the mentioning of women, gender, even social inclusion, I've been very liberal in that sense, was minimum. You know, like, for example, the Dutch NECPs, it's a document of 270 pages. Women were mentioned 4 times, only in the human capital agenda. We need more women working in the energy sector. So what we see there is that it's hardly there. Energy poverty became an obligatory section after the first drafts were submitted. Hardly any member states did mention energy poverty. The European Commission stepped in and said it's an obligatory section. I think that is a great exercise for many member states to at least consider and thinking about and reflecting upon energy poverty. Although the country with, well, what we consider one of the most gender equal countries in the European Union, Sweden, has the shortest paragraph on energy poverty, mainly basically saying it's dealt with in the social welfare policy. So I think in the upcoming round of evaluations of the NSCPs, taking into consideration the gender mainstreaming perspective, it needs to get an obligatory section. At least it needs to mention gender. And I hopefully that is being used by the member states to reflect on that and how the gender impact is on the of the NCPs. On the other hand, it's a paper tiger. It is a plan. It needs to be enforced, needs to be implemented, and I really applaud Kata of her point on budget. Now, me being a policy advisor for municipalities for more than 15 years before I rejoined academia, budget is the huge problem. So you have a wonderful paper policy. It might be supported by the civil society and by the politicians, but if there's no finance to implement it, if there's no monitoring mechanism, that monitors the implementation. If there's no accountability, then it will be policy evaporation. The policy will be evaporated and nothing will be there. So we definitely need a holistic approach to address gender mainstreaming. It's not only about women as consumers, it's also about women working in the energy sector. The energy transition has a huge human capital agenda, but we can't only wait for women to solve that problem. It's also about men and women working jointly on this issue. And on the other hand, we need to look also at the different skills and the different levels, because now we're really focusing a lot on the municipal level, at the local level, because there's wonderful initiatives there. On the other hand, it also increases what I call spatial injustices. It depends in Europe also where you live, what your local government is doing to support you in energy poverty mitigation measures. And I think there is a key for the national level to step in.
Thank you very much, Marielle. And I actually had to check some data, because I did the exercise back when all the NSCPs, the final NSCPs, were submitted, to go one by one and check how many dimensions of gender or women I would see. I saw a total of 5 out of 27 NECPs that mention anything related to gender mainstreaming. So indeed, there is a long way to go, and I think maybe we can discuss afterwards the potential that is there further. And now moving towards the European dimension, I would like to bring you in, Megan, because you were director at the European Commission's Directorate General for Energy until mid-2019, which was also roughly the time when member states were submitting the final NECPs. And I think it would be great to hear from you. How do you see the perspectives and let's say a little bit the awareness of gender within energy policies has been shifting over the past years? What can you tell us about that?
Is this mine? Yeah. Does it work? Yes. Good. So thank you very much. I mean, I think that let's put it in perspective. The clean energy transition will help everybody. There's no question about that. It is also to address energy poverty. Energy poverty, as Joy has said, as Eva has said, as many of the others have said, is primarily impacting women, because single family households are primarily led by women. Older populations also are higher in the energy poverty group. They tend to be more female. So all the activities that address energy poverty, wherever they are, either through the NECPs or through the EU activities, by definition, should have a greater impact on women, by definition. But what I think is so important, and it's been raised by Joy, Eva has mentioned as well, is identifying exactly where, when, and how, and making sure that the policies and the financing that go along with those move towards it. So the other element here as well is the just transition. So moving people away from coal primarily, that's the main area, and it's been mentioned in the study for the FAM committee that this primarily affects coal miners who are primarily men, but it also addresses their families. And their families are very much dependent on not just men working as coal miners, who are primarily men, of course, but the whole community and the families, and these all have to be addressed as well. So by definition, all those actions will have an impact also on women. But again, it really needs the data, it needs to be addressed, it needs to be identified, and it needs to be pushed forward. So then one other point before I come to your main question is on the NECPs. The NECPs were designed to push the member states into achieving the goals that had been identified through the Renewables Directive, through the Energy Efficiency Directive, through the Energy Performance of Buildings Directives, etc., carbon emissions reductions, etc. And this was, in one aspect, important because of the governance regulation, which covers all of that. and because the targets were now at EU level and no longer at individual member state. If you have a target that's for, let's say, Slovenia, you know what Slovenia's target is and you have to address it. But because this was addressed now at EU level, you needed this better coordination and better collaboration both among and between the member states and at EU level. So gender aspects were supposed to be in the national energy and climate plans, and they were also supposed to be a signal to investors, because all the investment in the clean energy transition will not come just from government. There's no question about that. A huge amount has to come from the private sector. So they were supposed to give a good signal also to the private sector as to where potential existed for future investment. So I think Eva has really made a very clear presentation on where changes have taken place, both in the Fit for 55 package of raising the ambition of EU climate goals, clean energy transition goals, and by Ursula von der Leyen bringing in a commissioner specifically for equality and mainstreaming this aspect through each of the directors general. So this is something that needs to be done now in the national energy and climate plans at the next update, which I think is next year, isn't it? 2023. Is it 20? Well, they have the first assessment in 2023, I think. So this is somewhere where these aspects can be better integrated and will allow better assessment of where has the money gone, where has the efforts been taken, what has been the impact on women. So there has certainly been an improvement, there's certainly been a change. The Committee of Regions report, I think, identified the different pieces of legislation where gender mainstreaming, gender aspects were identified in particular. And then one last point I wanted to raise on skills, which of course is very important. You know, I'm sure most of you in the room, how important the increase has been in clean energy jobs. So there's been a huge increase in those jobs, but there is still a skills gap. And so it's really important that the whole population participates in that, men and women. And one aspect that I wanted to draw to your attention is that the European Union Sustainable Energy Week next year in June has a strand on skills. So those of you who want to raise the issue of gender element of skills in the clean energy transition should, by all means, raise that in this context. And so let me be brief and end by saying there has been an increase, but more needs to be done.
Thank you very much, Megan. In relation to the European Sustainable Energy Week, I think that there's an open call at the moment for policy sessions. So if you're interested in this topic and want to raise the issues, you might as well want to. I've been involved in the past at the Sustainable Energy Week, so I had to make this shout out. But thank you very much for providing us this perspective of also a little bit, let's say, the inside work of the Commission, also when it came to national energy and climate plans and what's the potential. Now, last but not least, I'd like to bring in Milan Elkerbout. You've been one of the co-authors of the study, and you've been looking into the different redistributional aspects on the Fit for 55 package, on carbon pricing in particular. So, what can you tell us about that? And do you think that these mechanisms are fit for purpose as they stand?
Yes. Does this work? Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Anna. So in some ways, yeah, we could say that all Green Deal and all Fit for 55 policies have distributional implications. It's just that we do not always talk about them or even acknowledge that they do. It's maybe a little bit of a feature of EU policy in general, where we first really want to talk, is it effective? Is it a good design to get more renewables, more energy efficiency or emissions reductions, whatever? But there will always be distributional implications. Someone is paying for it, or it will alter some incentives in the economy. this has also really been a very pronounced feature of EU climate and energy policy for, well, since its inception. It has to be, but the implications of that are quite far-reaching. So if you look at a very high level, just at dividing society first into two groups, households versus industry, and then I understand that you can do gender disaggregation in both groups in theory, but there is a massive skew towards making households pay more relative to industry. It's maybe inevitable or understandable because there's a lot of innovation that needs to happen, for which subsidies are given, but there's also things like the feed-in tariffs for renewables that have existed in many member states, Germany first and foremost, that just end up directly on the bill of electricity consumers, so you and me. For industry, I mean, they pay taxes as well. They need to pay for emissions allowances under the emissions trading system. But there's also a lot of compensation there, and that had to do with the risk of carbon leakage, the fact that if they are the only ones to face this cost increase due to carbon pricing in the EU, then they cannot compete with non-European producers. It's an understandable political risk. The evidence for actual carbon leakage is very limited. We did mitigate it, but we did it by providing a lot of cushions, compensation, free allowances. And free allowances are simply an economic asset with a lot of value. It's hundreds of billions of euros we're talking about. Now in the energy crisis, it's inevitable that there will be a whole lot more of this, also in the recovery and resilience funds, and there's a lot of opportunity there, I think, to do much more with gender analysis, but as we have heard, it might not be happening at too detailed a level yet. I mean, and the data, I guess, is one explanation. Now, one very specific example, which happens to be the policy I simply focused most on, but it's the emissions trading system. It was already mentioned earlier that there is this proposal for extending the system. It would be extended then, or rather, there will be a new system, the ETS2, for road transport and for the heating in buildings. Now, if you add a carbon price to the fuels used in cars, even at the much higher levels we have today compared to a few years ago, it might make petrol or diesel 2, 3, maybe 5 cents more expensive. I don't think that's a big deal for anyone because governments can always choose to lower the vast amount of taxes they already levy on fuels anyway, and they also get income from the sale of these allowances. For heating, it's a little bit different because here the impact, especially if you have a poorly insulated home, could be bigger. You're maybe talking 25 to 33%. So that, I think, is significant. But the Commission did see this coming, and they made a proposal for a social climate fund, which is maybe the most explicit EU-level policy we've ever had, really aimed at redistribution. The beauty or the annoying thing about the ETS2 and the social climate fund is that one part of Europe dislikes one and very much likes the other, and the other way around. The thing is, if we do not have a new source of allowances to sell at the EU level, then it will be very hard to create such a fund because it's always very difficult to do things at the EU level while staying within the commonly agreed EU budget, the 7-year cycle. However, I mean, now with an energy crisis, it's even more important to have such a social fund. it does passes, then I think the governance should also really reflect all the issues that Joy and the other speakers have highlighted. It will be a perfect opportunity.
Thank you very much, Milan. We've heard different perspective, I believe. We've gone practically from the individual to the European level. And now, I mean, I will open very soon the floor for Q&A, but I've seen that Kata will need to leave in about 5 minutes. So maybe I can just ask you a quick follow-up question for you, if you have any reactions to what the speakers have said, and also from the point of view of a municipality and from a regional level, what do you think that you need from national governments, from EU policymakers to be able to enact more gender-sensitive initiatives, energy and climate initiatives at local level?
It's an easy question. Cities, we always say we need more funding. Of course, also, okay, we need to have more power in the local level. So it's not always about asking for European money. It's always what we ask, especially big cities, big capitals, that we need our own authority, because we have a lot of ambition and we see that a lot of things are actually driven by this local ambition. So anywhere where we see progress in gender equality, we see it coming from progressive mayors from the local level. So this can drive this, because a lot of times, a lot of cities, maybe many countries, don't even start because they have no idea how, because this path is not carved out. So if we have progressive mayors who have the power to do this, who have their own budgets, they don't need European funding for that. But if there is this sort of subsidiarity and strong local levels that has this power, and maybe we can channel in direct funding for gender equality, we can channel in direct funding for implementation of Green Deal. But if there are these mayors who we support, they can carve out the way, and it will be much easier for all others to follow. So I think this is especially a field where good examples are really needed. I mean, good examples that other politicians see that somebody does this, they actually survive it politically, so they are re-elected, and they are having happier citizens. And because this is what we want. We want to have sustainable and happier societies. And if we see that actually a gender budgeting can lead to this really helps. But it will, I think it will only become reality if others see that this thing works. So you need to support these mayors. You need to have these tools. I'm not talking about direct funding of all municipalities, but channeling in special European funding, encouraging these local levels to do more, who has the ambition to have the assets to do more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kata. I think it's very encouraging to see, progressive mayors that are encouraging to do so much more in this front, and that are, putting it into practice already at local level. And thanks a lot for joining us in this discussion. Now, I think Megan had some reaction.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting discussion, of course, but I wanted to just come back again to the financing issue. And this relates to member state financing and a little bit to what Milan said and what Kata said too. And that is one of my pet peeves, which is the inefficient subsidization by member states of fossil fuels in particular. And all of you are living in a European country, you all know how difficult it has been, and this is global as well, of course, how governments have suffered during COVID, have had to provide assistance and support to families. It's also true in the clean energy transition that we're going to need a lot of government support and government help to make this work well. But providing across-the-board subsidization of energy prices that will affect everyone, let's call it equally, is not at all equal. And Milan can tell you all the details, and many of the others too, that if you give everyone 20 cents off a liter of petrol, it affects primarily the people who are driving, who Joy has told us are all men, or primarily, let's put it that way, people who are still driving cars, and not the people who suffer the most. So what is so important in these subsidies and help is to make sure that the people suffering the most are the ones who benefit the most. And then one small point on Carmen's question about the cost of energy. It's true, energy is expensive and it has to be inexpensive both for households and industry. But if you look at the cost of renewables, which have dramatically decreased over the last years, this is where we need to put even more technology in new, innovative ways of finding good, clean, sustainable sources of energy for all of us.
Thank you, Megan. Well, we just have about 15 minutes left to conclude the discussion. I have plenty of questions, but I'm also so sure that members of the audience would also like to ask questions because you don't have such a stellar lineup very frequently. So I don't know if I have any questions from the audience. So our panelists, anyone who'd like to take the floor? Please, Sophia. Yes, that'd be better. Thanks, Mariela.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Sophia. I'm an independent consultant in climate, gender, and security. And my question will be maybe a bit more theoretical, not that practical. And in my research, when I try to distinguish climate and gender, I see that both have a lot to learn from each other. And as we were trying to mainstream gender since already at least 22 years, since the beginning of this century, now we have to do the same with climate, energy, and everything what we have discussed today already. So I don't know if in your work, do you already see some correlations between climate and gender in those terms that they have something to learn from each other in a way, and the way we were mainstreaming gender, the same way we have to mainstream climate right now?
Thank you, Sophia. Who'd like to? Yes, Mariela.
Well, thank you for returning the mic. Yes, I mean, in my work, I also do some research on gender and climate change, gender, climate, energy. I mean, I'm hopeful. Look at sustainability. Like 10 years, 15 years ago, sustainability was considered a buzzword. Now, all policy areas, whether it's health, whether it's water, energy, food, needs to get a sustainability paragraph or has a sustainability issue in it. Sustainability became mainstreamed. Well, I think with gender, there's still a long way to go, but hopefully, I mean, and Martin might agree with me, in the end, we hope to address gender in history classes, isn't it? So in the end, it's going to be mainstreamed. What we see in gender and climate change is that an increasing acknowledgement of women as what they call in more the NGO terms, actors of change. Those that are well, affected the most should be the one to talk to raise their voices and to be heard at the policy arena. So there is an increasing understanding of involving the end users or those that are affected in policy making. However, we see the same with climate change as with energy or other crises, that if you are feeling, not really vulnerable, but have, it's about resilience, and the capacity to absorb crises and to respond to that. And if you are, living in poorly insulated housing, a heat wave might affect you different than in a well-isolated insulated houses. So there's a lot of combinations there. And I think that is, again, also we need to address in parallel and in mutual reinforcing advices and policy measures. Yeah.
Thanks, Mariela. I think Martin has his hand raised as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer this question because we are just doing a review article of gender and energy research When I compare gender and energy research to gender and climate research, gender and energy research is lagging like 15 years behind, both in developing theoretical concepts and using them, like intersectionality, as well as masculinity studies and also equality issues. So energy and gender research lags behind in bringing up the core results from gender research overall. And my explanation of that is that the energy sector is heavily male dominated. So the research has had really a problem the gender research has really a problem to advance in that area. So that was one answer to that. I just also want to add to the issue of this two Europeans or European unions that was brought up in the end of the panel. In my research, we see that we can call it the authoritarian part of EU with Hungary and others. They are obstructionists, both in regards to climate policies and gender policies, and that overlaps. And they are instead want to really bring back this industrial breadwinner masculinities as a core of their culture. So we see a backlash from that authoritarian EU as of today that is really need to be addressed also in the energy policies and in connection to gender.
Thank you very much, Martin. Do we have any more responses to this question?
You just can take a look on the impacts on heat waves. They are being detected to be different between women and men. Also because women, we tend to live more years, and since 65 years old, our body is less prepared to adapt to high temperatures. And also coming back to this idea of maintaining life, for example, epidemiologists, they have detected that children, their body, they're not ready to adapt to higher temperatures, but they always have somebody taking care of them. And who is taking care of them? So in line with this role Mariel was saying, as an active actors, hopefully within some years, not only women will be taking care, but it's important who is taking care of these lives, and how are we incorporating this into the climate change speech.
Yes, thank you. I'm Fanny Sauvignon from here at CEPS, but from the Foreign Policy Unit. And thank you very much for every insight you shared today. So next week, heads of state from the EU and from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations will meet here in Brussels around a lot of issues, including the green transition and the green partnership. And as many of you mentioned, for the first time, the EU is, okay, not for the first time, but the EU is also encountering challenges, energy poverty, difficult conciliation between energy independence and safeguarding energy consumption for core sectors and for core segments of the population. And on the other hand, we have these policies with the so-called developing world and ASEAN, in which we're trying to improve the green transition there. And it's also difficult, and it's also a point of tension between themselves and with the EU. So I'm trying to see how would you approach this discussion that will take place next week. It's difficult on both sides, but they will try to solve it together, something like that. And whether perhaps with what has been done in ASEAN, do they also have lessons for us in terms of gender and energy, gender and climate justice?
Well, it's a very interesting issue, of course, and there are many similarities and even greater challenges in some of those countries. ASEAN is perhaps a little bit different from some of it, but just to give an example of one of the recent agreements at COP27 was to provide funding for Indonesia, global agreement to provide extra funding to Indonesia to help it wean itself off coal. So there's an example of one of the things that is done. You mentioned the European Union foreign policy and development assistance, which also focuses now on clean energy, climate change issues, and of course, gender improvement and gender recognition. I'm not sure about lessons from ASEAN to Europe. I'm sure there are many, and I'm sure those will be discussed and exchanged. But there are a lot of common interests and common areas of challenge where they can easily exchange. And I've been in many of those discussions, not obviously at the government leaders level, but amongst the energy ministers or amongst the ASEAN EU group, and they're extremely useful and very productive.
I actually think Joy might want to respond to that.
Would you like to jump in?
It's a good question that you ask. You raised Indonesia, and I would hope that one of the things that they're going to raise next week is the recent introduction of law in Indonesia about sexual activity, which I think is a step backwards. But I think one of the things that Mariella and I have done is we started life working on gender in the global south, gender and energy in the global south. And I think there is quite a number of lessons to learn from that. In particular, if you don't ask the end user and involve the end user, then you don't get the right issues to address. Cook stoves is what gets a lot of attention in the World Bank, in donor support. But if you actually ask women, that's not necessarily the first issue they want addressed. They want clean water. They have to go for water 2, 3, 4 times a day. They used to have to go down the hill, carry it up. Fuelwood, they go up the hill to look for it and carry it down, so gravity helps them. But they do that once a week, possibly. It depends where you are, of course, it's very contextual. But it's a me time. They go with other groups of women and they exchange ideas, they socialize, they also do socialization of their children. So those are very important times for them. If you don't discuss it with women, yes, some women will want the fuel wood salt, but you have to ask the user what they want. And that goes, I think, also to Martin and the masculinities issue, is that the only people who tend to be being asked about things tend to be people with a technical background. Who has the technical background in energy? So it's not that they don't have good ideas. I mean, that's not a criticism of them. But if you're only asking one half of the population, you're only getting one half of a set of views, which they may also coincide, but still one's got to ask.
Thanks so much, Joy, for the insight. Do we have any final question then? Well, I mean, I think if you don't mind, because Martin has also had to leave us, so yeah, I mean, I think as long as we can hear each other, then we don't really need the microphones anymore.
Oh, yeah. All right. So my
name
is
apologies. You may need it for people who are listening on YouTube.
Oh yes, true. You're right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
So my name is Veronique Renard. I'm an independent consultant working on energy, gender, policy issues. And my question, in fact, I'm building up a bit on what Professor Clancy has just mentioned. We see that, energy efficiency will be very, very important to I mean, to reach the climate targets and play a big role in the energy transition. However, what my understanding, and Professor Clancy just confirmed it, is that gender, I would say, energy literacy or energy awareness is very gendered. So what can be done, and that links a bit, you know, the debates around energy poverty and energy awareness. What can be done to ensure that women are, I would say, have the tools to understand their energy consumption and to possibly, you know, diminish their consumption?
Can I give an example? Yes, because also you have to leave soon. I also have to leave, yeah. Oh, and this works. So can I just give you one example of energy rating of what are called white goods? So everything that is sold in a shop that's a stove or a cooker or whatever, any electrical appliance has to have this energy efficiency marker on it, which was part of the energy efficiency directives from years ago, and it keeps improving and upgrading. The studies, and Joy will tell us the exact numbers, a very large percentage of household budgeting decisions are made by women. So they're the ones who are there buying those electrical appliances, or at least having an important influence on deciding which electrical appliance are bought. Therefore, those energy efficiency markers and identifiers give a really helpful view to heads of households and women in particular as to where they can gain money by using more efficient goods. And the other thing that is related to that is the eco-design approach, to make things more ecologically friendly, to make them more improved. And again, consumers, by and large, for those kinds of aspects tend to be women.
Sorry, but I'm also, you know, thinking of smart metering. We hear, for example, you know, women, and a recent study was made saying in the Netherlands that in fact, you know, when a household installs some smart metering, who's understanding the smart metering? It's mainly the men.
Yes, well, I mentioned before that I taught energy management also with a technical background. I look at this damn thing and I think, I don't understand what this is saying. And if I don't, then the average, you know, I'm not speaking down to people, but if me with a technical background in energy can't follow what this thing is doing, then the, you know, others can't. Oh, you can. Well done, Carmen. You can give me a lesson later then. But what I was going to say is energy efficiency is one thing of a piece of equipment. Something that came out of one of the studies that I read, which I think is an interesting global north, global south dimension again, is one of the things that a lot of focus on the global south is women's time poverty. And one of the things that came out of this study from Denmark is that it's not only the energy efficiency that people are interested in, but if we get a new piece of equipment, what does this involve my time in maintaining it or feeding it? This was particularly about little wood chips, briquette chips, of how much I had to keep feeding this into my new stove, or how often do I have to top up my battery for my solar panel. So I think that's an interesting issue that's now become in the global north is a time poverty issue.
Thank you. Thanks, Joy, and thanks, Megan. Just, short final reactions, because, we are slightly already behind schedule. So,
how we increase awareness and how we transform women into active agents. We are always worried on that because even though we don't have all the data, we already know what's going on and how we transform this. And I would say the STEAM training, there's a huge gap. We've already said that. We've worked interviewing women living in energy poor households, and it was not our role. But at the same time we made the interviews, we take a look at the boiler, and at the same time we eliminate the air from the radiator. So it's a huge gap, and who makes all these improvements at home? So we need to learn it since we are children. And now in Spain there's a project called One Women Engineer at a School, because it's been demonstrated that girls, since they are 6 years old, they already feel less prepared for mathematics and all the, from 6 years old. What are we doing? So we need to take a look at the roots of these things, and also to help them to participate in activities like we are very used to do these neighbors assemblies to transform their buildings. At what time are these assemblies? At 7. This is like the rush hour at home for dinner. And so we are now, every time we propose a workshop, we offer an activity for children. So we help the participation. This is something like very basic, but you cannot find easily workshops in which you can leave your children to participate. So this is something like everything we do, we need to think, okay, which is the perfect time for women? What do they need to participate? So.
Thanks, thank you, Carmen. Well, we're slightly, behind schedule, which means that this has been like a really insightful event. We've had a lot of great questions and great answers to it, I believe. I can just say that it's been really interesting to being able to disengrain these important topics when it comes to the gendered impacts of different energy and climate policies. And we hope that the study that we've presented is just going to be a starting point of this discussion, and seeing the commitment from policymakers to bring the recommendations into a reality. So if I can ask for a big round of applause to the speakers that have joined us today, because it's been really a great discussion. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us, for your questions, for your participation and attention. And we hope to see you in subsequent events. Hope this is going to be the first of many. Thank you very much. Have a nice rest of the day.